Welcome to Spirits of Whiskey. We explore the wide world of whiskey through the many colorful personalities who make it, promote it, write about it, and more.
With each podcast, Carrie Moynihan, a certified bourbon steward and bartender, and yours truly, Philip Dobar, director of the cocktail collection, interview whiskey's most important names.
From high-profile makers, blenders, and ambassadors,
to out-of-the-way innovators and remote pioneers.
Join us as we discover the people and elements that give the water of life its spirit. It is Whiskey Wednesday, May 19th, 2021, and you're listening to episode 42. Today, we speak with Rob Arnold, TX whiskey maker and author of The Terroir of Whiskey, a distiller's journey into the flavor of place.
But first, stay tuned for this week's Whiskey Chronicles. Spirits of Whiskey explores the wide world of whiskey through high-profile and out-of-the-way makers, blenders, writers, ambassadors, innovators, and pioneers. And we've been traveling the world virtually to bring these people and their whiskey journeys to you. We realize just how many great stories we've put aside to share with you at a later date. And that date is here. Spirits of Whiskey is offering access to its new VIP content page to loyal listeners and whiskey lovers who want more. And when it comes to whiskey, who doesn't want more? For as little as 99 cents a month, you can have access to videos related to topics discussed on past podcasts, as well as our new series, The Malting Floor. Sign up now to become a supporter at anchor.fm/spirits-of-whiskey. That's whiskey with an E. Click on the support button and select the contribution level that's right for you. Once you've submitted your payment information, just visit our website, spiritsofwhiskey.com, to create your personal VIP access account. We can't wait to see you in the VIP lounge. Join us. Terroir. There are few concepts more closely associated with the quote-unquote magic, rather than the mechanics, of winemaking. Magic? Well, it's not really magic, at least not in the prestidigitation sense of the word. Rather, it's in the sense that we humans who care about causality often explain the seeming alchemy that occurs between the factors in an equation and what comes out the other end as something more than, or at least different from, the sum of its parts. So, again, terroir. On the front end of the winemaking process, the factors in winemaking, as it were, it's the complete natural environment in which a particular wine is produced, including soil, topography, and climate. On the back, or consumer end of the equation, it's the characteristic taste and flavor imparted to a wine by the environment in which it is produced. So, okay, both of those definitions are lifted directly from Oxford Languages, an online dictionary, and both include the word wine in the definition. Many, however, have wondered, and continue to wonder, as well as argue one way or the other, as to whether terroir can be applied to other alcoholic beverages, including beer and spirits. But nowhere in the spirited beverage universe does the debate over terroir generate more heat than in whiskey making. Some, perhaps most notably last week's guest on Spirits of Whiskey, Robin Robinson, author of the Complete Whiskey Course, argue that terroir just cannot, and thus does not, survive the distilling process, which, when compared to the fermentation process, which produces wine, is a violent affair, which effectively strips spirits of those elements of terroir associated with wine. Robinson, rather, offers provenance, a term that denotes the origins and sources of a given product and its elements, as a more appropriately descriptive and thus effective means of appreciating whiskey's ecology and humanity. Still others, among them today's guest, distiller Rob Arnold, author of The Terroir of Whiskey, shout, "Not so fast!" to those who dismiss the notion that distilling destroys the vaunted nuances of inputs and outputs so valued in wine. By taking readers on a world tour of whiskey and the science of flavor, Arnold argues that whiskey does indeed embody terroir. And he makes his point, in part, by showcasing the work of innovative botanists, farmers, and distillers who, through the rediscovery, propagation, and use of heirloom cereal grains, are working to recapture a sense of place and create identifiably local strains of the water of life.
Up next, we speak with distiller Rob Arnold about his whiskey journey, his latest book, and his thoughts on terroir in whiskey. Stay with us.
Hey, do you like whiskey, food, and adventure?
I do. Hi, I'm Carrie.
I'm Philip.
I'm Louise. I'm the chef.
Chef Louise Leonard, as in our World of Wheezy segment host here on the podcast. And Whiskey, a Chef's Journey. That chef.
That's right, the project that started this very podcast. The series stars our very own Chef Louise Leonard, winner of Emmy-winning The Taste on ABC.
And explores and connects the worlds of whiskey and food, city by city, country by country.
Would you like to see this spirited culinary adventure on a TV near you?
Well, you can by helping us finish the pilot episode through our crowdfunding campaign.
For more information, including behind-the-scenes photos, videos, and incentives,
And to make a pledge,
visit our website, whiskeyashefsjourney.com.
or search for our campaign, Whiskey A Chef's Journey, at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com now.
Well, I think it's a cheers to that.
Let's. Cheers. Today on Spirits of Whiskey, we talk to Mr. Rob Arnold, Master Distiller at Firestone and Robertson Distilling Company in Fort Worth, Texas, makers of TX whiskey. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you.
So, Rob, as you are now getting your doctorate, how on earth did you get from a child in school to still an adult in school? And did you always know that this would be the section of education that you would pursue? And what is your whiskey journey?
No, I definitely did not grow up thinking I was going to get a PhD in plant breeding and genetics, first off. And I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be a distiller either. So I am from Kentucky. I grew up in Louisville. I'm a third generation member of the whiskey industry. So my uncle, grandfather, my great uncles were all in the bourbon industry. A lot of them worked for Brown-Forman. My uncle ran an engineering company that helped build distilleries from Kentucky to China. My great grandfather was a brewmaster from Germany who came over to Indiana to be a brewer. It's definitely in the family, but I grew up and it was never a career path that I planned on taking. I always liked science. I didn't know for sure, but I figured, well, I'll go to college and do pre-med, which is what every kid that likes science in high school kind of thinks they might go do, it seems like. But then I started doing research in college, really as a way to bolster my application for med school. And I just became enamored with research in the lab because science really came to life. It was so different than in the classroom. And I spent some time at some great institutions, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which is the oceanography arm for MIT, worked with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I did some time at Oak Ridge National Lab. This is all as an undergrad. A scientific research career was what I wanted to do. So by sophomore year in college, I knew I didn't want to go to med school. I wanted to be a scientist. I went to get a PhD at the University of Texas. They're one of their main medical branches is here in Dallas, where I live now, at UT Southwestern Medical Center. So I do a PhD in biochemistry and was doing drug discovery research, but also started making beer in grad school.
Nice.
And this was all back in 2009 was when I enrolled in that biochemistry program. So I was homebrewing as a PhD student, and then I might have played around with distillation at home.
In that state where it's legal, right?
You could not possibly comment.
Yeah, I can't remember. It was so long ago now. But what happened was I realized that so much of the science that I enjoyed and the pursuit of science, the way that science works and the way that you explore topics and conduct experiments, a lot of that overlapped into brewing and distilling. And then I really got to learn more about my family's ties to the industry. And I decided I wanted to pivot and become a whiskey distiller and utilize that science that I was very passionate about, but also enter an industry that I had family ties to. My plan was to try to open a small distillery, but through the grapevine, through due diligence of trying to start a distillery, I got in touch with Troy Robertson and Leonard Firestone, and they were the two proprietors, they were the founders of TX Whiskey. I got in touch with them before the company had ever been announced to the public. I heard them. They needed a distiller, so I joined them as the first employee back in 2011 as the distiller for TX Whiskey, and have been there ever since.
And on the side, you've been writing books.
Yeah, well, so a really good friend of mine, his name's Eric Simonek. He's a professor at TCU. He's the chair of the chemistry department, actually.
That's Texas Christian.
Texas Christian University, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually worked with Texas Christian University early on when I joined TX because we actually went out and isolated a wild yeast that we used to make all of our bourbons and rye whiskeys. And I needed some lab space to do the wild yeast hunt the way I wanted to do it. And so TCU gave us lab space. So I got to know a lot of the faculty there. Eric, I got to know really well. because he early on, from when I first met him, I think he asked me, "Hey, let's write a book together about whiskey." And so for a couple of years, just the idea was just floated back and forth. But then we ended up doing it, and we wrote a book called Shots of Knowledge: The Science of Whiskey that TCU Press published in 2016. And about that same time is when I joined my second PhD program in plant breeding and genetics at Texas A&M. And my project there was all around whiskey, really around evaluating and developing corn for whiskey, which really hasn't been done, at least the Prohibition era.
Wow.
Can't make up my mind about who I am. Am I a distiller or a scientist? And so eventually I just gave up and decided I would try to be both.
Yeah.
The scientist distiller, the actor singer.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Why limit yourself?
Definitely more scientist now probably than I was even a couple of years ago.
So you learn the nuts and bolts, the hands-on aspect of it on the job. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's what I learned early on. The science, I might have understood a lot of the science and the theory, but to apply it, it's experience. There's just little things that you just, like for instance, how to clean tanks correctly. That's a massively important part of the process. How to correctly use caustic, how to correctly steam a fermenter. You can know all the science and all the chemical information and even whatever, DNA, whatever. It doesn't matter if you can't clean your tank,
right?
Because you're not going to make good whiskey. So a lot of on-the-job learning. And I had some great teachers, Dave Pickerel, like so many other distillers, that was our original consultant. Dave's first job in the bourbon industry was actually with my uncle's company.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So very much a full circle kind of thing.
Dave was very much a Johnny Whiskey seed.
Yes, for sure.
Exactly.
Responsible for so many whiskeys and so many careers.
Uh-huh. We actually built our second distillery that opened. We started making whiskey there in early 2018. So our first distillation system was a pot still operation, which is what Dave trained me on, the pot stills. And that was back in 2011, 2012. Larry Ebersold was our consultant for our new distillery, which is a traditional column still doubler operation, a traditional bourbon production distillation system. And Larry was the master distiller at what he calls Seagram's or LDI or MGP.
Mm-hmm.
And he's, in a lot of ways, a lot of new distilleries that have installed the traditional beer still, which is the column still, a beer still doubler operation, Larry has been their consultant. There's anywhere from New Riff to Rabbit Hole to us. So that's really a cool part about the industry is there's obviously a lot of marketing fluff around the word master distiller, but there is still that kind of master apprentice relationship. It's not like it used to be, I'm sure 100 years ago, but it's still there, which is a really cool part of the industry.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So what was the first thing you made off the still?
We made a lot of bourbon. The first distillery, it was all around bourbon. We did experiment with some other mash bills, from rye whiskey to single malt whiskey, which hasn't been released.
Ooh.
We even played around a lot with it.
Will be.
Yeah,
we'll be very happy to do that
out
for you and give you some notes.
Yeah. We played around a lot with a straight barley, which really like a single pot still Irish whiskey.
Nice
mash bill where you had we had 60% raw barley, 40% malted barley. But we're very much a bourbon distillery. Our new system, our new whiskey ranch is our new distillery. That's what we call it. And we're one of the largest distilleries in the country with that operation. We can do about 40 barrels a batch.
And it's on a former golf course. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. It's on a former Glengarden Country Club, which we bought back in 2013, 2014, and then it took us a couple of years to build this new site. But we've produced a lot of bourbon and a lot of rye whiskey on that system, and that is what we focus on.
Now, this blended whiskey, this is at least all you released for the first 4 or 5 years, correct?
And the blended whiskey, and we've never tried to hide this fact, has always been whiskeys that we source. So there is bourbon in the blend. There's also light whiskey, which is a style of whiskey that is distilled to a higher, more neutral proof than bourbon, and then aged in used barrels, unlike bourbon, which is obviously in new barrels.
When you put this out, is it the same recipe for each batch you blend, or is it if you get one from 3 years ago, it's going to be different than the ones you put out today?
It should be consistent, but there's always slight drifts in it.
Is this 100% sourced, or is there any of your juice in it?
Right now, it's 100% sourced, starting in, I'm not counting down the days, but starting in March of 2022. All of the bourbon that's used in TX whiskey will be our Texas bourbon. And we also I'm hoping, we don't have the system to make light whiskey, but I do hope that we can ship our Texas grains to MGP, who produces light whiskey for us, and have them use.
There are some great light whiskeys out there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's starting to come into its own yet in terms of reputation, but whiskey folk are starting to see that there is something to light whiskey.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting style, and the distillation proofs that you can target are widely different. You can have a 161 proof light whiskey that could be super flavorful. You can have a 189.5 proof light whiskey.
Wow.
I'm talking like off the still proof. And that would be a whisper away from neutral spirit. Both of those would qualify as light whiskey as long as you aged it correctly. So, and aging it is in a used barrel. But it's very much, it's essentially our Scotch grain whiskey, Irish grain whiskey, our equivalent is light whiskey.
Awesome.
They're produced in nearly the same way.
I really like the tops you have on all these bottles. They all have different tops.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, work with local bootmakers around Texas, everyone from big boys like Justin and Tony Lama to...
The bottle design, and a couple of them have collars, have cloth collars.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's all boot leather.
Oh, that's awesome.
So we actually more craft boutique makers in Fort Worth, like ML Letty's, and we work with them. We acquire boot scraps from them. So when you make a pair of Western boots, there's always boot scraps left over, and they could produce wallets or belts or just throw those scraps away.
That's wonderful. So the 4 bourbons have boot leather collars.
Yeah, mine has boot leather on the top, and then it's got a cloth neck, looks like.
Oh, yeah. There's leather on the top. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The cloth neck, the canvas wrap. Yeah.
I really love how you're no waste, basically. You're using people's scraps to make something else so that there's less waste in the world, which I always appreciate.
We're a Texas-based distillery. We wanted to tap into where we're from, and we do that a lot with our ingredients on the, especially with the bourbons and rye whiskeys that we produce. Very much believe in the idea of terroir, that it applies to whiskey as well.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
One other thing I've noticed about these tops, and that's the great sound it makes when you open.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, they're musical.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to have a bottle design that had a Texas theme to it, but without being super tacky by having a belt buckle. Granted, there's a big TX on the bottle. We're not being that inconspicuous, but
that's just so the post office knows where to send it. That's all.
Right.
I think it's a very unique idea, though. I've never seen anybody else do anything this fancy with their top, so it's unique. I like it.
Yeah. Now, Rob, when we interview someone who has 1 or 2 whiskeys, maybe 3, we wait till the end. But we have 6 before us. And so typically when there are 5 or 6, we taste as we go. Yeah. Shall we start with the blended?
Yes, I just poured mine.
Yeah, so the blended, it's 82 proof. We have a proprietary recipe blending different whiskey styles. Like I said, it's all 4-year whiskey that we use. So it's straight bourbon, and we use light whiskey. And the idea with the blend was to really accentuate the sweet vanilla flavors of bourbon while we quiet down some of the more oak forward notes. Not that those are bad, but in this style of whiskey, we wanted a very light, drinkable, versatile whiskey. And
if you were to add some dosage to this, you would have a toffee liqueur. This is just magnificent.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's very sweet, vanilla forward, caramel.
It is. The nose is very vanilla extract with a very light hint of unsalted Play-Doh. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh, okay.
But this one, it's like vanilla extract on top of Play-Doh that doesn't have salt in it. And it's amazing smell.
And it's not overly complex. It's not meant to be. It's not, the finish is pretty, it's not a long finish. It's a light mouthfeel.
No, but it's light and fluffy. I like it.
And based on how light it is, the flavors, the sweetness, it's very versatile in cocktails. It can work. You can make a great margarita and substitute TX whiskey for tequila.
And can you tell us what the mash bill is, or is that proprietary top secret information?
No, it's not proprietary. So the bourbon is a corn, rye, malted barley mash bill, and it's 75% corn, 21% rye, 1% malted barley. The light whiskey is a 99% corn, 1% malted barley recipe.
Okay.
So it's very much a corn forward whiskey with some rye and malted barley mingled in there.
Okay.
I have not tasted anything like this blend before. It is so good.
Yeah. Now in 2016, I believe you introduced your straight bourbon. Is that accurate?
We did, yes.
Presumably you'd been making this from the beginning and it had been laying up.
Right.
Because it's a 4-year, correct?
It is, yeah. So we started blending TX whiskey in 2012 and bottling that and selling it. At the same time, we were distilling from scratch TX Straight Bourbon. But we did wait for, really, our first batch was March 2012, and we didn't release it till December 2016.
Mhm.
We waited on it, and it is a 90 proof bourbon. This is 74% corn, 14% wheat, 12% malted barley, so it's a wheated bourbon. All of the corn and all of the wheat in the bottle you have is from a single farm about 45 minutes south of Artery.
I get a lot of leather on the nose on this one, and I don't think it's from the top.
No. No,
That's lovely.
you get leathery spice, like cinnamon spice, dark fruit, fig kind of flavor to it. A lot of that cinnamon, dark fruit, and we know this because we've done studies, but a lot of that's coming from our proprietary wild yeast. So we have a wild Texas yeast strain. It's actually the first thing I did when I joined the company was go on a wild Texas yeast hunt. My neighbor owns a brewery, and they've made beer with our yeast, and it's a very Saison, Hefeweizen, farmhouse style. It's a Bavarian. It's like those Bavarian wheat strains, those that have a lot of that nice phenolic and spice notes and some of that fruitiness, and that's really what our yeast provides. So we know, we've looked at the chemical makeup, the certain volatile phenols that you see with these specific yeast strains. Ours produces those. To me, it's a massively important part of the process. It is something that Kentucky and Tennessee and really American distilleries in general have always been very much believers in, that yeast is a crucial part of the process. The proprietary strains are a way to provide flavors to your product that are distinct, that no one else has. Master distillers used to be called distillers and yeast makers. That's how important the ability to capture and propagate yeast was. It really does impact the flavor a lot. And that's not that surprising. Fermentation is, or I guess in general, you've got the grain, the yeast, and the oak barrel, and they all do play a role. Just because the oak barrel might be the most influential in some styles doesn't mean that the other two ingredients are not massively important when it comes to the final flavor of the product.
I'm a big Speyside Scotch region whiskey drinker.
Yeah.
And bourbon, although I like it, usually if there's an option between bourbon and a Scotch, then I'll take the Scotch unless it's a disgusting blend, and then I'll do bourbon. So I generally don't go for the straight bourbon unless that's all they have.
Yeah.
If I was in a restaurant right now and I saw this on the shelf, I'd pick it number one. This is fantastic. And I love that the smell, it smells like Wilson's leather shop, which I don't know if they have those anymore, but also it smells like a boot barn. And it brings me, like, this taste brings me back. No, it's great. This taste brings me back. I used to work at this ranch called Bucknord Ranch when I was in junior high, actually, in the summers. I was 14. And we would it was up on the hill in San Jose, and there was horses up at the top, but then we'd have this whole picnic area where people in their businesses would come and they would have these Western style picnics for their companies. And every weekend we'd wear jeans and red and white checkered shirt with the little cowboy tie and the cowboy hat. And we would be doing like hay rides and all these country type potato sack races, all these things.
Yeah.
And the smell and taste of this bourbon totally brings me back to that.
Bringing you
my
back
childhood.
To that. Yeah, it's definitely not a lot of Kentucky bourbon is going to have more vanilla, more kind of banana, juicy fruit flavor to it. It's usually sweeter than our TX bourbon. Now, I don't know, how much of that is due to the pot still, because what you're drinking right now came off our pot stills versus what we're going to start releasing in a year once our column still bourbon turns 4 years old.
So do you not have the pot stills at all anymore, or you have both?
We do, but they're not in operation.
Okay.
But I am curious in general across all of craft whiskey, just as more of these newer distilleries start working on systems that look a lot more like what Kentucky has been using for a long time with the heritage brands. That's why I do think I think a lot of these very unique pot still bourbons are great. I also personally love column still bourbon, and I think a lot of places around the country that are starting to, again, distill this style of bourbon. There's always these comments, well, craft bourbon doesn't say anything like Kentucky bourbon. I do think that as craft distilleries, quote unquote, start having bourbon come of age from column stills, you'll see it start to gravitate closer to what's out of Kentucky. But that's why I think it's so important that the ingredients that we use are specific to where we are, and that we're not using commodity ingredients, because then you really will just make something that tastes kind of like what's in Kentucky, and your only major variable might be where you age it, which is important.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, this dovetails nicely, I think, single farm distillery. Talk to us about that.
So So the bourbon, all the bourbons in front of you, all of the corn and all of the wheat that we use in those bourbon and in our bourbon in general comes from a single farm. So Sawyer Farms is about 45 miles south of our distillery. It's run by John Sawyer. He's a fourth generation Texas farmer. And starting last year, we started to distill using his barley as well. We don't distill anything at TX that hasn't come from his farm at this point.
Wow. So he's growing the rye as well.
And the rye. So he does all four: corn, wheat, rye, and barley, which we have malted locally in Fort Worth. There's a local craft maltster called Tex Malt who does all the malting of our barley.
That's wonderful.
And there's no rye in our wheated bourbons, which is TX bourbon, but we do have the rye whiskey, obviously. And so that to be upfront, the one you have is our experimental release. We only made 4 or 5 barrels of that batch back in 2000.
We're so lucky, Philip. I'm excited about that.
Well, either that or we're unwitting guinea pigs.
That too.
Yeah. When we made our a few batches for fun, but we also realized we wanted to produce rye whiskey, but we didn't want to do it unless we could work with Texas rye. And so John was instrumental in Texas, one of the pioneers of growing rye here in the state, especially for whiskey making. And so we've got thousands and thousands of barrels of 100% whiskey aging in our warehouse, all from his farm.
There must be a history of cultivating rye in Texas because there are so many people of German extraction in Texas.
Yeah, and it's kind of like in Kentucky. There used to be a thriving rye industry, and it all went to the wayside with the commodity grain system. Now they're trying to bring rye back to Kentucky. Unfortunately, and we've dealt with this too, the modern varieties of rye were definitely not selected for warmer environments. There are ways around it. And John has been, like I said, a big part of finding the right techniques, just everything from when you plant it to how you apply the fertilizer to all these things. It's not perfect. We love the flavor, but the yields and
it's difficult.
There's still a long way to go. So we're actually starting to breed our own varieties of rye now, working with our collaborators with the idea that we will breed and select new rye varieties that are adapted to Texas and potentially to Kentucky as well. We're working with our sister distilleries, Rabbit Hole and Smooth Ambler.
Okay.
I'm going to try the rye now that we've been talking about it. Yeah. All right, let's take a break from the bourbon.
While you're pouring yourself some rye there, Carrie, can you talk to us about your press materials? Speak of proprietary toasting and charring recipes. Let's talk wood.
Yeah.
What you do to that wood.
So everything in front of you, which would have been made at least 4 years ago.
Woo, that's hot.
Yeah, that's very fun.
I
think it's 120.
Yeah, 126.13. Yeah. Oh, wow. That's good, though.
Might want a little water.
I'm going to go get some water. I'll be right back. Keep talking.
But we've always worked with Independent Stave Company, char 3 barrels, new charred oak by law, and we use American white oak like almost every bourbon distiller does. Now this was a project that has been ongoing, or it lasted at least about 4 years, and then we implemented what we found, but we developed some proprietary toasting recipes with Independent Stave Company and incorporated those into our barrel program. Now, none of those whiskeys have actually come of age yet, but that will just be it'll be essentially the bourbons and ryes that we produce that have been aged in these barrels with proprietary toast will just be integrated into our existing expressions over time. There's everything from our new distillation system to new varieties of corn and wheat and rye that we're breeding, to barley from Texas, to proprietary toasted recipes for our barrels. We are constantly exploring how to create a better product. We don't ever assume we have it. And so there will be a natural evolution to all of our options for at least the next 5 to 10 years.
Don't do too much, because so far, so good. So far, so good. So don't mess it up too much.
Yeah. I don't want to change it drastically, but we want to continue to push the envelope and see what's out there. Now, we can also, through blending, you can always find ways to achieve consistencies and not lose flavors that you want. And we've got a great master blender, Ali Ochoa, who, like me, came from a hard science background. She's got a master's in flavor chemistry and sensory science.
I just love that title. I would just love to be able to walk around and say, I'm a mastery of sensory.
Yeah.
And we'll be happy to speak to her sometime.
And also, it sounds like some title out of Harry Potter.
Yeah.
sorcery or something. I wanted to say I added water to this rye, and oh wow, did that open it up? And it is it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
The bourbon's got some nice cinnamon spice, but the rye is that times 10. It's super spicy, and it's cinnamon and allspice, and
that's great.
Oh, my Lord, that drinks so smoothly.
I told you, it's delicious.
126.13, and yet that is the sweet spot. You must have determined that, as Dave Pickerel maintained, proof is a measure of flavor.
Yep.
More than it is a measure of heat.
Yeah, and I wanted to release some barrel proof expressions. We only had from 2012 to 2016, all we had was TX whiskey. And then from December 2016, we introduced TX bourbon, but we didn't release anything after that until 2020.
Uh-huh.
So the main thing I wanted to do was release some barrel proof expressions, because that's how I had been drinking our bourbon and the rye for a long time.
Do they all seem to get to be at about 127.2, or just my bottle for the barrel proof?
So everything that you guys have right now would have been an entry proof of 120.
Okay.
And especially at our old distillery, which was where all of our barrels were aging essentially in a big brick warehouse, those barrels really saw a big proof increase. From 120 to 126, 127 after 4 years was pretty common. But we see differences now in our rickhouse maturation. So we've got a 20,000 barrel barn rickhouse. We're building a new one right now, which, again, the traditional style of aging in Kentucky and Tennessee. And we see different changes in proof in that style of aging.
Yeah.
Sometimes they go down, sometimes they go up, based on where they are in the warehouse.
All right, let's see what this 127 is here.
One thing I wanted to cover, because I think it's worth discussing here, recognition, awards recognition for your work.
San Francisco World Spirits awarded TX Whiskey with double gold, Best American Craft Whiskey.
For the blended, yes?
For the blended, yeah, TX blended whiskey. TX Bourbon has picked up gold medals at San Francisco, at International Spirits Challenge, 92 rating with Ultimate Spirits Challenge. And the TX Bourbon Barrel Proof has picked up some golds as well at the Proof Awards, which is a new one that was this year, and 90 plus rating as well.
You're not doing too bad.
Yeah, we've done well, and we had a home run and right away in 2013. And then, like I said, we didn't release anything for a while, but it's been nice that, especially in 2019 and 2020, we started picking up some golds for the bourbon. And we had some silver medals along the way as well for the bourbon, but it was nice.
Yeah, those are good too.
Yeah, but it was nice when the golds came in.
They add color to the wall, so it's okay.
Yeah.
That's right. I have sat on many panels at many competitions, and sometimes everyone at the table is ready to award gold, which of course would result in a double gold if it's unanimous. But there's someone at the table who's just, I'm gonna stand on silver.
Yep. Yeah, that's the reality of it.
It is.
You enter more than one, and it's a good product eventually.
Now the rye is
it evens out.
Yeah.
The rye is 100% rye, 85,
it is
15. And if Dave Pickerel taught you anything, it's the fiendish difficulty of working with rye.
Yes.
Yeah, it's more difficult than corn. Milling's not quite the problem. It's the viscosity and the foam.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sure he told you his overloaded washing machine story.
Yeah.
There was rye foam everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever made rye whiskey unless you've had at least an overflow or two. If you have, you're not trying very hard. You gotta, because you just need so much headspace in the fermenter to account for the foaming.
Right.
But every distiller is the same way. They want to max it out, so there's just a few inches of headspace on their fermenters, no matter if it's a 5-gallon or 15,000-gallon fermenter. And if you're used to making bourbon, then there's not much foaming at all, so you just push it as far as you want.
There are more and more makers going 100%. We interviewed Becky Harris at Cowtown Creek, and everything they make is 100%.
Yeah, and we 85% rye, 15% malted rye is the recipe. And that was the recipe for what you have, which was our experimental trial batches back in 20.
I think the experiment went well, and you should just continue with that. It's delicious.
Yeah, we've been making rye with that same recipe since 2018. So we've got thousands of barrels in the warehouse of what will be TX straight rye, which will come out probably next year when those barrels will start to turn 4 years old. And we try to maintain at least for the base.
Okay. Maybe that would be a good time to interview your master blender.
That's right. That'd be a great time.
Here's a question. The barrel proof bourbon, straight Texas bourbon, is that the same as the TX straight bourbon, just barrel proof? Because I get a lot of the same notes on it.
Right.
Okay.
It is. This is honestly TX bourbon 90 proof isn't too different because we are just, that's one thing with a lot of the small distilleries. Our inventories are so low that we can definitely keep consistency in our products, but we're always finding ways to evolve it, 100 barrel batch or something.
So is it safe to assume then that's the same base that's going into the port finish and the sherry finish?
It is. So the port and the sherry finishes, it's that same 4-year-old. So we put that bourbon into tawny port barrels and into PX sherry barrels. And the tawny port barrels were French oak, the PX sherry were American oak, and they finished for 6 to 8 months and then bottled at 101.6 proof. And
mine are poured already.
Yeah.
All right, let's try that.
And the port actually just picked up a gold as well at the Proof Awards a few weeks ago.
Congratulations.
I love the color on that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and both of them, the color is very deep.
And of course, the bottle has the boot leather is a deep purple.
Yeah.
Reminiscent of port.
So the port finish, it's a lot of that grape, a lot of nuttiness, like toasted nuts, a lot of that spice is still there, that cinnamon, those baking spices.
Yeah, it's good. I definitely still get the leather, but I also get a nice, definitely not overly sweet. And the color on this is just this gorgeous amber.
Yeah, this is magnificent is not too strong a word.
Yeah. Now it's time for the sherry.
I love PX sherry. I love sherry, period. But PX sherries are just the ice cream of fortified wines. They're just special.
Yeah, and we did trials before we actually committed to the product with this PX sherry from the same bodega that we used for the large scale. And the flavors of molasses and like sweet barbecue flavors is super interesting. It's not what we expected, but we loved it. We weren't going to do both port and sherry, but the trials, we liked them both so much. And we thought they were distinct enough that they wouldn't necessarily compete with each other and that they would actually maybe might even be fun to have them side by side. We just decided, let's just do them both.
It is.
It's fun for us to have them side by side, I can tell you.
Yes.
Now, presumably the port and sherry casks were wet casks.
Yes.
I thought I would like the sherry better because I'm as I said earlier, a big Speyside fan, and they used to, and not so much anymore, but they used to do all their stuff in sherry.
Right.
But I'm in love with this port finish.
They're really not the same.
Yeah.
The sherry has, I think, a much sweeter molasses, almost a more rich profile. But that port there's so much grape forward. It's juicy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't stop making it.
I like them both, but they're different animals.
Now, these sherry casks, these are 100% American oak, correct?
They are.
Wow.
Yeah, they're all Quercus alba American oak.
Okay. Now, speaking of Quercus or Querci or Querci, Quercus Garryana.
Yeah.
We spoke to Matt Hoffman of West Distillery about his work. We interviewed him. And Quercus Garryana, they have one expression, I believe, currently that employs that oak strain that is particular to the Pacific Northwest. It's a very narrow band of it, which I think is, Carrie, I hope you'd agree, is a good segue to the notion of terroir.
I think it is. I am in love with this idea of the terroir. So I don't know if you've ever listened to our podcast, but we have the Whiskey Chronicles comes on before the interview with our guest. And one time, and I think it was actually it was that episode, we talked about the terroir of whiskey, and I had to make a note to say there is mixed views about is there terroir, is there not? And I said, but we'll talk about that in a different episode. And this is that episode because you have this beautiful book, The Terroir of Whiskey, A Distiller's Journey into the Flavor of the Place. Tell us how you define terroir in whiskey, because we know that so many people, including a previous guest who...
Full disclosure, Robin Robinson, we interviewed recently, and we did set up the two of you back to back. We're not going for cheap, but we are going for informed discussion.
Yes.
So,
Rob, tell us about the terroir of whiskey, because I'm with you. I think there's terroir.
So to me, it's tied to agriculture. It's tied to the grains. So that's something that it's not that I don't think that Quercus Garryana or Oregon oak has a certain provenance to it that makes it distinct and based on where it's from. But to me, when we can't have terroir apply to everything or else it loses its purpose. And I've heard Robin talk about this. If you're overlapping terroir and provenance, all of a sudden you lose the meaning of what it is. And in the wine industry, and wine is where this has been championed and where all the research is, terroir is tied to the vineyard. So we're not talking about the oak. Doesn't mean that where the oak comes from isn't important. It definitely is. But we're talking about the vineyard in the context of wine. We're talking about the farm in the context of whiskey. So to me, it's at a minimum, it's talking about how the environment influences the flavors that develop in grain on the farm. I think really a better way to describe it is how varieties express flavor in different ways through their environment. And that's much more in line with how it's looked at in the wine industry. That's very much in line with the basis of plant breeding, where you have genetic effects, so the variety, you have environmental effects, so the climate, how much water, how much rainfall, agronomic management, do you have fertilizer, manure, whatever. And then you have the interaction of those two, the gene-environment interaction. And that's talking about how varieties will express some characteristic in a way that's specific to where they're grown. And that, to me, is terroir, and the characteristic is flavor.
Yeah.
I guess opponents of whiskey terroir, I don't think they are of the mindset that grain itself can't harbor differences in flavor based on the variety and
Indeed, they are not, right.
Right.
What they posit is that while the distilling process strips the juice of anything that one could properly call terroir,
Right.
Yep.
but that it does not strip it of any character, rather the resulting liquid has provenance.
And I think that, again, terroir is an aspect, it's a part of a whiskey's provenance. So I would say the flavor as a whole and what makes that whiskey unique, based on the grains and based on the yeast strain and based on the oak barrel and what kind of oak it is and where it's aged. Is it aged in Texas or Kentucky or Tennessee or Oregon? And then the passion and the culture around the distillery and how they pursue whiskey making. To me, that's talking about provenance. And again, terroir is one part of this. And it's talking about how flavors that are derived from the grain can be influenced based on the variety that you work with and where that variety grows. Now, I totally get that on the surface, distillation would look like a very destructive process, especially compared to what winemaking looks like, which doesn't look nearly as destructive, where you have grapes and you crush them and they ferment.
Right.
That is not exactly how, there's more to it than that, obviously, but
I'm picturing Lucille Ball in that big vat right now with her feet.
You gotta get your foot into it. Gotta get your feet into it. Yeah.
So to a human, sure, the distillation process probably does look very destructive, but to a flavor compound, it's not. It doesn't mean that distillation can't potentially manipulate through chemical reactions that happen inside the still some of those flavor compounds that come from grain, but you're not destroying those flavor compounds.
Right.
So like really good examples are like terpenes, like beta-damascenone, beta-ionone. These are massively important for the flavor of not just whiskey, but also wine. We know they're derived directly from grapes and wine. They're also derived directly from grains and whiskey. They are important contributors to flavor in all whiskeys. They come from the grain. They're influenced by terroir and grapes. Why would they not be influenced by terroir and grains?
Right.
We don't destroy terpenes through distillation. You don't destroying a compound is not that easy. You don't destroy matter, first off.
Yes.
And to even break apart a compound is not super easy. Just because it looks destructive doesn't mean it is. Is it destructive to a human? Whatever. It's not destructive to a flavor compound.
Right.
It doesn't mean it can't potentially manipulate some of those flavor compounds and induce reactions. And that does happen inside the still. But a lot of the important compounds that are derived from grain directly are not destroyed through distillation.
So flavonoids are extraordinarily robust.
A lot of them are. I mean, like I said, terpenes are an important class derived directly from grains. So are a lot of volatile phenols. So like guaiacol, vinyl guaiacol, ethyl guaiacol. These are spicy, sweet spice, baking spices. They can come from a number of places, but one of those places is the degradation of lignin in the grain itself. So it's directly from the grain, and it's present in the mash, it's present in the beer, and it's present in the whiskey, and it's coming from the grain, and it's not destroyed through distillation. And again, these same flavor compounds are important in wine as well, and they've studied this in wine, and terroir impacts the concentration and presence of volatile phenols in wine. So again, why wouldn't it happen in whiskey as well? Grains and grapes might not look a lot alike.
Right.
Botanically, they are very similar. From a culinary standpoint, I get it. They're not. But from a botanical standpoint, they're both the fruits of their respective plants.
Right.
And their physiology is not that different, and neither is their chemistry, not in a relative standpoint. So there's a lot of the same mechanisms, and they don't understand this great in wine, especially at the biochemical level, what's happening. But they have studied it, and they do know, for instance, like methoxypyrazines, another one from the grape directly that's an important flavor compound in wine. It's also an important flavor compound in whiskeys that come from the grain. And they know that things like cooler temperatures, less sunlight, that's going to decrease the concentration of methoxypyrazines in the grapes.
Mhm.
Now, here's a question.
Mhm.
Since you're such an expert on yeast, in my opinion. Now, yeast is not, you can't, maybe you can, I'm not a scientist, but you can't just, you have to have natural components to yeast. So is yeast part of terroir?
So it's actually, this is an interesting part that I think even makes the role of terroir that much more of an important factor that we should consider and pursue it so that we can tap into diversity of flavor. But the yeast itself is, to me, the fermentation process. So that's not a part of terroir because you're not on the farm. Again, it's all tied to the farm, just like terroir is tied to the vineyard.
Mhm.
But you're feeding the yeast food that's coming from your grains.
Right.
So the yeast can't live in water. It needs nutrients to survive. And those nutrients are coming from the grains. And it's everything from amino acids to fatty acids to carbohydrates, so the sugars that it will metabolize into ethanol and flavor compounds. You're feeding the yeast a meal that's based on the composition of your grains. And terroir impacts the composition of your grains. And so what we found, and we actually have on this in a scientific journal, esters are one of the most meaningfully impacted groups of compounds when it comes to terroir. Now, esters are definitely in grains. They're definitely in grape.
For sure.
But they're not there in high enough concentrations to impact the flavor of the whiskey or the wine. So all of the esters that are in wine and whiskey and beer and so many other foods and beverages that are so important for flavor. Esters, the fruity esters are so important for flavor. Those are coming from the yeast during fermentation.
Right.
But based on what you're feeding them, you can really change the ester production, both in composition and in concentration. Inadvertently, indirectly, terroir is playing a role in the production of esters by yeast. So this is, again, you've got terroir impacting flavor compounds that come directly from grains, whether it's methoxypyrazines, whether the green bell peppery flavor, whether it's volatile phenols, spicy, whether it's terpenes that are floral, or terroir impacting flavors indirectly based on the fact that the yeast is going to respond and metabolize the food provided by the grain in a different way based on how terroir impacted that grain in the first place. Because again, that's the food for the yeast.
Right.
And all the flavor compounds that yeast produces is going to be based on the nutrients that you're feeding it.
Everything you just laid out for us suggests that you are well prepared to defend your dissertation.
Yeah, I hope you're right. But,
So that's what your dissertation is going to be for your final doctorate degree?
well, there's 4 chapters to my dissertation, and one chapter is around why, based on the comparison with wine, why terroir and whiskey exist. Now, another chapter is we actually studied terroir and whiskey directly. So we took 3 varieties of corn and planted them on 4 farms throughout Texas, from the Panhandle to our farm at Sawyer Farms, which is more central Texas, to the Gulf Coast, and then to the border of Mexico. And separately, we harvested and in the lab distilled all of those different variety farm combinations into new make whiskey. And then we did follow-up chemical analysis, follow-up sensory analysis, and actually showed terroir, whether it was the variety of grain, the farm, or the interaction of those two impacted 36 different flavor compounds significantly.
Wow. And you said this was the same corn variety in each place?
3 varieties that we grew in 4 farms.
Okay.
And also different flavors that were impacted, from corn flavor to multi-flavor to fruity to floral. So I think what we've shown working with Texas A&M and just through our own research is there is direct evidence in both beer and whiskey that terroir plays a role in flavor development. There is a ridiculous amount of analogical evidence compared to the wine industry because there is a lot of research in wine.
Right.
There's not a lot of research in whiskey. There's
Mhm.
UC Davis has an entire department devoted to wine research. You know, it's like wine has all this science backing it, and then a little go below that a little bit, you have beer, and then down the bottom floor is where you have whiskey. There's really nothing in the literature. Scotland has the Scotch Whiskey Research Institute, which has done a lot of great stuff.
Mhm.
But when you look at American whiskey, there's not a lot. But
Mention for the benefit of our listeners, this extends to all spirits.
Yeah.
Because, of course, all spirits undergo distillation. The cocktail collection, we've done tastings with a single estate vodkas from a single brand, and one most certainly can tell the difference from one estate to another.
Yeah, and I think if we talked about earlier, the fact that terroir impacts a lot of the yeast compounds, of the yeast-derived flavor compounds like esters, you really, at that point, I struggle with where the argument is because no one would debate that the important esters produced by yeast don't carry over into the final product through distillation.
Right.
Because esters are the most important flavor compound class in wine and whiskey and beer. They are the main contributors to flavor. And you just have, I like to describe it as, and I do this in the book, you have the flavor of whiskey, but you could apply it to anything as wine or beer. It's like a tapestry, and you pull on one thread and you're going to shift something. And terroir can pull it through multiple threads at once, just like yeast strain selection can, just oak barrel species can, just like maturation location can. So I don't mean to imply that terroir is the most important part of developing flavor in whiskey, but I do think it's a very important part along with everything else.
Right.
And to continue to tap into commodity grain is forget the issues with the farmer not making enough money and forget the environmental stuff for a second. But just if we're all using commodity grain, it's a disservice to the diversity of flavor that can exist within whiskey. And I don't mean to imply that there's not already an amazing amount of diversity in whiskey. There is. But I do think there's more for us to discover. And I think that those flavors will be specific to certain places. And that's where you'll start to see something similar to what exists in wine, where Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand doesn't taste the same as one from Napa. And there's environment, there's reasons for that based on the vineyard conditions. And you can't replicate that. Where I go with this in the book and where a lot of what I'm working on now with Pernod Ricard, which is our parent company around sustainable agriculture, where this really goes for me is that I do think we're going to find a diversity of flavor through terroir, and that's great. But I think probably what's more important is it's a way to break our farmers out of the commodity grain system. And that system is not working very well for them in general. It's not uncommon for a farmer to make less money on an acre of land than they put into it. The only reason they stay in business is government subsidies.
Yeah, subsidies, sure.
And
sure,
so
make up the difference.
There was this newfound pride in what they were producing because they could actually taste something that came from their farm, because they're not selling it to the commodity grain system where their corn is sold as animal feed or fuel ethanol. So they're actually a part of this journey. And I think that encourages, aside from the fact that you can start to pay farmers more fairly for their product, for a quality product, you also start to encourage innovation on the farm. And again, you can't really pursue better flavor on the farm without inadvertently pursuing ecologically friendly approaches to agriculture. We have a very romantic product produced from grain, much more romantic than commodity white flour or animal feed. And we could play a big role in promoting some of these approaches and these techniques and the message in general around sustainable, maybe even regenerative agriculture. And by dismissing terroir and just saying, hey, just use commodity grain or whatever, or it doesn't matter, I just think that it's not a step in the right direction.
All right, cocktail talk. Talk to us. What do you like? We don't ask our guests what their favorite is because that's a fool's errand, we believe. Talk to us about categories. You walk into a bar and TX is not on the back bar. What do you order?
I love egg white based cocktails. So,
those sours?
I love whiskey sour. Look, I'm more of a novice when it comes to cocktails, if I had to be honest.
Please be honest.
But whiskey sours, big fan of old fashioned. I really do like Manhattans and Negronis, the classics.
Yeah, sure.
We get that a lot from a lot of people that do this show, and I'm wondering if it's
from
just
the whiskey makers?
Because we're all into whiskey, and so we all like the classic whiskey cocktails.
We've had several people say, does neat count?
Yeah.
Or the rocks. That's adding something. So cocktail, yeah.
So we get a lot of good
I love this whiskey Rita. You recommended using TX blended. I'm going to try that.
I will say, though, And as a distiller and one that loves to get into the science of it, it's something it's nice to just go to a cocktail bar and not know a whole lot about cocktails and just enjoy it.
Yeah.
And not worry too much about it. And
Nice.
not analyze it, because it is hard for, especially if it's TX, to just sit back and enjoy the whiskey without jumping straight into trying to analyze it. I don't like that aspect of it. It's just reality. But it's nice cocktail.
Oh, of course. It's very difficult.
Feel like I don't know what's going on, so I just enjoy it.
Where can our listeners purchase your book from?
On Amazon, of course. And our gift, or you can go to the TX Whiskey gift store if you want to buy a signed copy as well. And we do ship.
Oh, nice. Okay. Go for the signed copy.
I'm just going to say this. The book smells good.
All right. Yeah.
The book smells delicious.
Yes. The book has terroir.
The book has terroir, yeah.
It does.
Yes, made heirloom pulp.
Yep. I did tell Columbia, who's the publisher, I said, the quality of this paper is nice. I like it. Y'all did a good job.
That's nice, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful book. I'm already started reading it, and I can't wait to finish it.
Well, appreciate it.
And we are going to get a copy for one of our lucky listeners, thanks to Rob Arnold. He's going to donate that to us. Everyone should stay tuned to see how they could get a copy of that. And then also stay tuned to see what Chef Louise will be making with one of these lovely expressions. I can't wait to find out. Rob, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And for imparting your knowledge of science and whiskey. It's been fantastic.
And imparting your whiskey.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been great. That was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We hope to have you back when you have something new to share with us.
All right. It was good talking to you all.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
World of Wheezy is up next. Stay with us. Hey, Louise, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we're going to talk about some Texas whiskey from TX, Straight Bourbon Whiskey. We had a whole bunch of expressions from them. I think it was like 5 or 6 total. So I gave you a whole bunch of samples of that. And which one did you decide to go with?
Well, hello there. Shout out to all of our Texan homies. This week I chose the Texas Straight Bourbon in the Pedro Ximénez sherry cask.
Oh, good choice.
I just loved this particular expression. And of course, all I could really think about was flan. I lived in Spain for about 1.5 years. I did eat a lot of flan. And I also did drink quite a bit of sherry because that's what you do while you're there.
That's what you do.
And I was thinking about, okay, so I want just a traditional flan, but why not take some of the fruit that you kind of pick up in the notes of the whiskey, the stone fruit, the cherries, plum, apricot, and do a flambé with those using some of the bourbon.
Ooh.
And serve that alongside the flan. I think it would be a decadent dessert, to finish a meal. It would pick up a lot of that caramel and candied nut notes from the bourbon. It'd be quite an excellent pairing.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I remember my very first flan was actually in Germany, and unfortunately it was not good. So I had a very bad taste in my mouth about flan for years. But now I'm glad to say it was just a bad experience. So this sounds amazing, and I can't wait to try it.
Well, I don't know that the Germans are known for their flan. Never heard.
No, I don't think so.
And I would say most people that say they don't like flan, it's because they have not had a good one.
I'm going to say they probably all went to that same place in Germany where we had it. And they served it to us 2 nights in a row. It was part of our, we had this tour package, and they just gave us whatever was on their menu. And we happened to be at this hotel for 2 nights, and they served it to us twice. And they knew we didn't like it the first night because nobody ate it. And everyone's like, what is this? Because it was so foreign looking. And you'd think, oh, they didn't eat it. We'll give them something different because they had other things. But no, they didn't. Anyway, I digress.
They were pushing it on the dumb Americans.
Yeah, sure were.
You can't blame them for trying.
Yep. So that sounds really delicious. I can't wait to try that. And I can't wait to talk to you next week about what we're going to be tasting next week. So I'm going to let you go and get to your baking and your cooking and your pairing so that we can talk next week about the next one.
All right. I'll speak to you next week.
As we conclude our 2-part debate on terroir and whiskey, we invite you to visit spiritsofwhiskey.com, click on our giveaway banner at the top of the page, and enter to win Rob Arnold's latest book. The contest ends June 1st, 2021. But for those of you who can't wait that long, feel free to purchase a copy by clicking on our whiskey shop in the navigation bar of our website.
For show notes on today's podcast, please visit our website at spiritsofwhiskey.com. That's whiskey with an E.
We'll include links and supporting documents from today's stories in this episode's blog post.
As always, you'll see upcoming topics, a guest roster, and links to past shows.
Sign up to become a VIP member of Spirits of Whiskey. With your membership, you'll have access to listen to our series The Malting Floor, be able to watch extra video content related to past episodes, and you'll enjoy access to our new web series, Tales from the Still. To learn how, visit our website and click on the pop-up button.
If you run a whiskey club, or if you're a member of one, and you'd like your work featured in the Spirits of Whiskey Club Corner, send us an email via our website contact form, or leave us a voice message on our Anchor page.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time,
Sláinte.
Spirits of Whiskey is produced by First Reel Entertainment and the Center for Culinary Culture, home of the Cocktail Collection, and is available via Anchor, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts are heard.